Everyone thinks mass hysteria is psychological. What happened in Strasbourg in 1518 killed people who couldn't stop moving. July 14th, 1518, Strasbourg. A woman named Frau Trafia stepped into the street near the Rhine and began to dance. Not a waltz, not a celebration, a frantic, solitary convulsion that wouldn't stop. Within an hour, she was drenched in sweat. Within a day, she'd collapsed from exhaustion. But here's what the physicians didn't yet understand. She wasn't alone, and she wouldn't be the last. By day 3, a second dancer joined Frau Trafia, then a third. By the end of week 1, 34 people were dancing in the streets of Strasbourg, unable to stop, unable to explain why. They weren't joyful. They weren't celebrating anything. They were terrified, trapped inside their own bodies, watching their legs move as if possessed by something they couldn't name. The city council held an emergency meeting. Physicians arrived with their leather-bound texts and bloodletting instruments, utterly baffled. One theory, the dancers had been cursed. Another, they'd inhaled toxic vapors from the streets. A third, which would prove tragically influential, was far simpler. If people wanted to dance, the council reasoned, let them dance it out of their system. In August 1518, the city hired musicians, drums, pipes, lutes. They positioned them in the streets where the dancers moved, believing that music would somehow cure the affliction. Instead, something worse happened. The sound didn't break the spell. It amplified it. More people began to dance. By September, the number had climbed to over 100. This is where the timeline matters most, because what happened next, the city didn't yet comprehend. The dancers weren't getting better. They were dying. A man named Hans Judge danced for 7 days straight until he collapsed on the street. 2 days later, he was gone. Within a month, at least 4 dancers had died from exhaustion, dehydration, and the sheer physical trauma of movement they couldn't control. The council finally banned the musicians. Too late. By October, over 250 people were dancing involuntarily through the streets. Families tried to restrain their loved ones, holding them down, locking them in rooms. Nothing worked. The afflicted would break free and return to the streets, legs moving in that same terrible rhythm, eyes pleading for help no one could provide. Physicians from across Europe sent letters to Strasbourg. Some blamed witchcraft. Others pointed to astrological alignments. A few suggested it was divine punishment for the city's sins. But one Alsatian physician named Paracelsus offered a different observation. The dancers were suffering from what he called a disease of the imagination. He meant it literally, that the mind, under extreme stress, could force the body into uncontrollable motion. We don't know if he was right. What we do know, Strasbourg in 1518 was a city gripped by plague, war, poverty, and religious anxiety. The Reformation was beginning to fracture Christendom. Famine had struck repeatedly. The psychological weight was immense. Whether Paracelsus's theory was correct or not, something had broken in the city's collective mind. By November 1518, the dancing had largely stopped. Some dancers had died. Others simply collapsed one final time and never stood again. A handful recovered, though many were left permanently weakened. The city tried to move forward, burying the dead, recording the names of the afflicted in careful medical documents. But Strasbourg never fully explained what had happened. Modern historians and neurologists have proposed theories. Some point to ergot poisoning, a fungus on rye bread that causes convulsive symptoms. Others suggest mass psychogenic illness, a phenomenon where psychological stress manifests as physical symptoms across entire groups. Neither theory fully explains the deaths, the specificity of the dancing, or why it stopped as suddenly as it began. What we can say with certainty, the dancing plague of 1518 was real. The names were recorded. The deaths were documented. And it remains one of history's most unsettling reminders that the human body and mind are far more fragile and far more interconnected than we often assume. Subscribe. Each week, we unearth another forgotten story that rewrites how we understand the past.